Hello, hello, and welcome to a very special Healing Element podcast. This is a live event that we are doing. If you've been following my page, Kai Marie _ the Healing Element, you'll know that I've been doing a special this week called The Return of the Kings, a conversation of healing for Black men. With everything that's going on in our community and throughout the country, this is definitely a time for this type of conversation. Today, our topic is going to center around mental health and resiliency. So without further ado, I want to introduce my guest tonight. So I have Brandon Jones, who's a psychotherapist, professor, consultant. He specializes in adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, historical and generational trauma, social and emotional intelligence, leadership, and youth justice. Born and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota, Brandon has survived living in a home of domestic violence and various other forms of trauma. Brandon holds a BA in sociology from the University of Minnesota, a master's in community psychology from Metropolitan State University, and a master's in psychotherapy from Adler Graduate School. Brandon is also a 2013 Bush Foundation Leadership Fellow. He is also a professor at Metropolitan State University, Inver Hills College, and Century College. He lives by the motto, live life with purpose on purpose. Welcome, Brandon.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you for having me today. I look forward to the dialogue and the conversation.
For sure. Next, we have Dr. Terrence Bird L. He is the principal and CEO of Amex Economic Development. Did I say it correctly?
Amexum?
Amexum?
Yeah.
Are you trying to say I can't read? You doing this live?
No.
Consulting, LLC, Community Economic Development, venture designed to provide transformative leadership in building vibrant, sustainable neighborhoods and to catalyze economic growth in economically distressed communities, utilizing strategic investment and wealth creation strategies. Dr. Bird L. has over 17 years of experience as a community economic development practitioner working in low-income communities. He has worked in many capacities in areas of workforce development and economic development. Most recently, he has served as the Director of Consumer Policy for the New York State Division of Consumer Protection. Prior to this position, he served as an Empire Fellow in the New York State Department of State Executive Office as a policymaker, where he worked on and provided oversight to various state capital improvement programs across New York State. Dr. Bird L. attended the State University at Albany from 2000 to 2004 and graduated with a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology and minor in Africana Studies in 2004. He attended Southern New Hampshire University from 2011 to 2012 and graduated with a Master's of Science in Community Economic Development in 2012. And in 2018, he graduated from St. John's Fisher College with a Doctorate of Education in Executive Leadership, conducting a study entitled Perceptions of Unemployment, African American Men on Labor Market Accessibility, Implications for Economic and Workforce Development Policy. Today, Dr. Bird L. resides in Syracuse, New York, and is the proud father of his beautiful and intelligent daughter named Amina. Okay, beautiful. Okay, and last but not least, we have Curtis with us. Curtis Outlaw, born in Newport News, Virginia. He is a graduate of Shaw University, the oldest historical Black college or institution founded in Southern United States. He is an experienced professional emergency manager with a history of working in the public and private sectors. In August 2011, Curtis moved to New York City to further his education and received his Master's of Public Administration at New York University's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. During this time, he worked as a policy analyst, Assemblyman Michael Blake, New York State Governor's Office of Storm Recovery, and FEMA. In 2014, he founded Young Black Kings, an organization dedicated to combating barriers which may prevent the advancement of young Black men and women, including his hometown of Newport News. Curtis claims to instill a great sense of pride in our culture, self-awareness, and the belief in one's ability to overcome challenges in communities where drug and gun violence are affluent. In January of 2019, he relocated to Houston, Texas for an opportunity with Deloitte as an advisory specialist senior, where he He is responsible for assisting local municipalities and universities to comply with federal regulations and FEMA public assistance program. Wow. Okay, so we got some heavy hitters. All right, so we're gonna jump right into it. Just if you joined us on Tuesday, you'll know that with Deloitte, an advisory specialist senior, where he is responsible for assisting local municipalities and universities to comply with federal regulations here public assistance program. Okay, there we go. I'm getting some feedback. So after the opening remarks, now we're going to turn it over to the panel just for them to kind of talk about the importance of tonight's conversation. We will be taking questions, so make sure that if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube that you just drop your comments or questions in the comment box, and we'll make sure that we get to those. We won't necessarily wait to the end of the presentation to get to any questions or concerns that you may have. Just feel free to drop them in there. Okay, so starting off, and as we'll start with Brandon, just for some opening remarks. I want to get your thoughts on the African-American experience in this country and how it has shaped how Black men view themselves and how they are perceived in America.
All right, perfect. Hold on one second. I'm getting some feedback on my end. All right, so unfortunately, one of the things that we have dealt with as a people has been adversity. We've built a culture around responding to the racism or white supremacy, however we want to term it, that we've gone through. And Black men have viewed ourselves typically through a lens that is altered. And when it comes to comparing ourselves to other ethnicities of men, there's always this kind of negative element, a negative viewpoint and negative narrative that comes from Black men. Not saying that it's right, but it's just something that is present. A lot of Black men only see their value through their sexuality and physicality. So what I can do sexually or what I can do physically, whether that's violence or just, any type of prowess just in general, physically, that's how we validate a lot of our manhood. One thing that I've noticed in the work that I do is a lot of Black men have graduated or had that rites of passage into manhood through some kind of traumatic experience. One of the things that I don't have any groups right now, but when I used to facilitate groups for men and young boys, the first module that we utilize is masculinity, identity, and formation. And the first question after we check in that I ask these men is raise your hand if you're a man. Everybody's hand goes up. You can be 14 years old, 16 years old, 34 years old, don't matter. Every Black man hand goes up. And then the follow-up question I ask these men is, how do you know? And the answers that I get are startling. I'll get things like, I knew when I got that inbox message from a girl that I was messing with that she was pregnant and she's saying it's mine. Or I knew when the judge told me that I had to do, 36 months. Or I knew when I had my first pistol. I knew when I had to take care of my little brothers and sisters. I knew when I had sex for the first time and it was with a woman who was 24 years old and I was 12. That's when I became a man. All those things, unfortunately, become badges of honor and manhood in our community, but all those things are traumatic. And when we are graduating our males into adulthood through traumatic lenses, everything from there is a traumatic experience. And unfortunately, we have an altered view of our manhood and masculinity. So that's something that I end up seeing. Yeah.
Thank you. Terrence, you want to speak to that?
Yes, absolutely. But Brandon did a great job, I think, speaking to that point. But just to expound on it, I think the experience in this country, as he said, is, of course, been traumatic from the start, just from the outcome, because the basis of the confrontation between the Europeans and the Africans that were in the Americas prior to Europe being here, it was purely based on conquest. So just that initial interaction from that onset, and even in that onset, it was a historical basis for that. As you know, it was a part of the crusade. So in a sense, this is an extension of that act of war that was declared on our ancestors in ancient times. So I think now we're now here as a part of the offshoot of that generations later. And here we are still in a predicament of where, we're still in a position as a people where we're kind of still clinging to a lot of those principles that kind of trace us back to that position and social structure of slavery. So I think in talking about it today, we'll see how, a lot of those traumas are intergenerational, and the very interaction of between African American men and European American men, as you'll see, as we see, is often it leads to a clash of ideologies and a clash of culture, and that also comes down to the ideal of masculinity. Whereas one ideal of masculinity is just that, it's upheld as a standard, but then that's threatening to another man. So just keeping that in mind. So I think, but unfortunately, we're in a society that takes away the voice of those who have non-European descent, and kind of makes, if it's not culturally acceptable or integrated, so to speak, or diluted down, it's not acceptable. So I think, here, allowing this platform to just speak genuinely and authentic, giving an authentic voice, I think in essence, it provides hope. But I think when we talk from this platform, I think, we got to go forward with some strategies to move forward, because we can't keep looking at the same ideas from yesterday and expecting them to work. When you start to understand the nature of something, then you have to act accordingly and prepare yourself accordingly when you're dealing with that thing, instead of just being in awe or in fear of it. And with that, I'll let Brother Curtis speak, and that's my time. So thank you.
So both good points to highlight. So kudos to you both. Thank you again, Kai, for the opportunity to speak. I just want to touch on how current events is what's happening in terms of the actual identity of Black men as of right now. I consider this sort of has been an awakening of our like awakening for America. America can no longer have a deaf ear or blind eye to what is taking place, because this has been going on for centuries. Like, there has been the mistreatment, and there has been a sort of there has been policies that have been put in place that have been targeting Black people. So I look at what is sort of going on is we're coming together, we're identifying more things about who we are, like the greatness in which we come from, and using that as a tool to move forward and gain some type of, not to say that we haven't already had it, but some type of authority. And so, for lack of a better word, and so I just look at, like, prime example with Mr. George Floyd, and it makes me think, like, if COVID wasn't currently happening, or if the world was operating in a way in which it was going about its normal life or whatever its normal way, would people actually be paying attention and investing this much energy and time towards sort of like a Black call for help? This is something that we've been addressing or been wanting to bring forward for years. If you think about redlining policies that have been put in place, the Tulsa race riots that happened March 31st, 1921, the Tuskegee experiment. So all of these things have transpired against the Black community. And so now with Mr. George Floyd, his transitioning, his murdering at the hands of another cop, it just instilling a greater sense of pride in terms of who we are. So when I hear folks say Black Lives Matter, now it's more with the sort of strength and aggressiveness, which I think in the long term will have a positive effect on who we are as a people. Because at the end of the day, unless, like, all lives cannot matter unless Black lives matter, because the amount of contributions that we've had to the advancement of this country for centuries, for decades, is goes without being goes without being challenged. So, until we come out this, like Dr. Bird said, like, until we come out this situation creating some actual tangible and intangible policies and action items and goals that will address this systemic oppression and this systemic form of racism, hopefully it won't be in vain, but I'm pretty sure that it won't. So we just have to wait and see what happens.
No, thank you for that, for your open remarks. I think we lost Brandon, but hopefully he'll be back soon. But just to kind of continue the conversation. So one thing, Dr. Bird, I wanted to go to you about this, as we're talking about how Black men are perceived in this country, and knowing that how different laws are set up to produce certain type of outcomes. So you've done extensive research on the unemployment among African-American men. Can you share with us a little bit about your findings of those high-level unemployment rates and how that has impacted Black men in society? A lot of times we see laws that are made, but you can probably, with your research, you can really bring it home to really speak to how families are.
Hey, Kai, you're freezing a little bit.
Yeah, we lost you for a second, Kai.
Just coming back.
She's coming back.
But I do just want
But I think I know where she was going with this, so I'll address it for the audience. One of the profound statistics that I found alarmingly was, on average, and this is consistently across all 50 states, is on average, African American male unemployment rates are often double European counterparts in the state. So, for example, New York State here is 9.9%. I think at the time of my study, New York, then the African American male in comparison were almost 20%, about 19.9%. And then that's kind of consistent across the board, no matter what state, no matter what county, no matter where you look at that data, you'll see it a whole. There's almost a 2-to-1 ratio of unemployment. And now you think about that, and I'm going to put some data out there, and for people that are quantitative or that like numbers, you might get it, but then I'll also bring it home as to the significance of what these numbers really entail and reflect in our community. So they said during the Great Depression, when you have 1 in 3 men unemployed, or 33% of your males, the Great Depression, right? In our case, we have numbers that are a little bit more alarming, where we have almost 1 out of 3 are unemployed. So our numbers are a little bit more, and if I kind of said that a little misleading, I'll correct that. But either way it go, the data is a bit telling in terms of the disproportionality of the disproportionate rates of employment. Now, when you talk about how does that impact, well, your ability to earn now is what is almost a staple or a basic foundation of the functionality of citizenship. We've gone from phases of slavery now to getting the right to vote to now, and I heard Minister Farrakhan say this in a speech, 50, 60 years ago, we was begging for jobs and justice, and here we are today in 2020, I think almost 10 years from the date of his speech, and we're still talking about the same issue. So at some point, those numbers kind of tell that tale, and we know that that's kind of a plight, urban plight, and a lot of the basis for this urban unrest we see in the protests, on top of, the modern day lynchings and the whole new Reconstruction area that we're now under since President Obama is out. So you best believe this is going to be an era of backlash unseen since Reconstruction. And Dr. Amos Wilson kind of foretold this in his work in the early 90s when he said, if you ever get a Black president, once you get out of office, expect the backlash to be unprecedented, to where literally, as we've seen with George Floyd and others, they're literally outright killing, young men on the street on TV. And believe it or not, it's legal. And it's legal because, they're getting off, and there's certain legal statuses that we have to understand about our people when it comes now to the functionality of citizenship, where, we have to keep up with these things, and we have to begin to institutionalize our knowledge so that we can begin to adapt and give ourselves more of a functional role in society together. And really, we have to up the ante. Stop talking about civil rights. Civil rights is defined as a non-political right granted to citizens. And that definition is oxymoronic in and of itself, because it's just either you're a citizen or you're not. And citizens have rights, inalienable rights, as these documents talk about. So I think there are a few issues, again, we have to really look at here and attack and organize around. And for one, the biggest one going back is actually the violation of the First Amendment, which is your right to organize as a people. We always often get caught up in, right, freedom of speech but it's really the right to organize and the right to assemble. You got to remember, that's what the slave codes and the black laws did, is disrupted that, and in a sense took away those rights of us to function as citizens. Because now, if we can't confer amongst each other and about what our interests are politically and economically and socially, you don't function as a person or as a people in a society, right? And that's where we are today, because it's trickled down to those fear tactics and those terroristic tactics that disrupted our communities. Um, so I know I got a little bit long-winded on that, but I'll go to the point a little bit, and I'll circle back around a lot, because my study, really it honed in on a lot of this stuff, man, and to see not just the historical aspect, but I think when we get to our more contemporary issues, you see they were rooted really in the civil rights movement, when we were trying to gain traction and kind of gain progress, but through loopholes and through the allowances of others to attach their agendas to our plight, it kind of got a little dissolved and a little watered down. Yeah. And of course, pretty much like Curtis is showing, and it just went off track and
Right.
in the favor of other people instead of the people it's intended to. So I think that's what I mean. We got to be more strategic when we want these policies addressed and exactly what we're addressing. And again, to take that from civil rights to now, we're looking at issues of human rights being violated.
That's true. And to just touch up on that point, you brought up some very interesting details and some facts. I think one thing that we consider, and it's good we're having this conversation, I guess, until Kai comes back, but history repeats itself. And again, as I was mentioning earlier about how America basically is being awoke, like not only America, but I would say the entire world, at something that has transpired and targeted Black people for centuries, for years, and we're beginning to have these discussions, these conversations, and address this systematic issues of oppression, against Black people. And so people have always had a certain type of notion of, okay, what is racism? Like, yes, it exists. Well, I'll even go a step further, and I'll correlate the dots. Amy Cooper, recent events that transpired in New York City with Amy Cooper, who basically called the police on, she called the cops on an African-American man for her actually committing a crime, right? Like, she had her dog off the leash and in a dog park. Okay, and I'll tell you the significance of that amongst the Black community. Think about Emmett Till. Everybody is familiar. No need to go into details of what exactly transpired, but this guy was falsely accused as well. Emmett Till. If you think about the Central Park Five, who I'm pretty sure we're familiar about that, falsely accused again by, someone who feels that they could, a certain system, I'll say that, a system that was used to target these Black men using stereotypes. Regardless if they were out, young boys doing whatever, still they were falsely accused, not given the same opportunity. Their lives were foreverly affected. So just think about what could have happened to Christian Cooper if police would have showed up, and his life probably would have been his life probably would have changed forever. So to your point about trying to identify a certain type of like, what do we need moving forward? I think now, we've marked, we've protest. I think now is to actually identify some goals. I have these conversations with my friends, and I've had it on many occasions. I'm all for reparations. I really am for reparations. We had this conversation early this year, and he was like, "Well, I don't think that's possible." Well, hell, the government just cut all Americans who make under $75,000 a $1,200 check. So it's definitely doable. It's possible. I'm all for reparations. I think this should be targeted to not me, of course, because I'm in a position to where I'm okay. But like, think about our parents or our parents or our aunts or our grandparents, our aunts and our uncles, who were denied certain privileges and certain opportunities based on the color of their skin. Think about that. Think about how that ripple effect and how it's affected us as people, whether it be indirectly or directly. And I had these conversations with my parents, who, I'm from Virginia. My mother and my stepfather, they're from North Carolina, and my stepfather graduated high school in '69. Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968. So during that time period, think about what they experienced and what they thought was normal. Basically, oh, I can't apply for this job because I know for a fact I'm not going to get it. Like, for that to be considered normal, not I'm not going to get it because I don't have the qualifications for it. Like, I don't have the expertise there, or I'm not willing to learn. Basically, I have no choice to apply for this job because of the color of my skin. And I think, given that America has done that for so many people, I think it would be only right and fair to address a certain group. The same methods that they took cutting this $1,200 check can be applied to putting out reparations for a certain group of people. Like, and that's just something that I think is a tangible goal moving forward. It could be in the form of a $1,200 check. It could be certain, I don't know, tax breaks that, I don't know. I'm just throwing out very vague very vague solutions, however you want to put it. But you know, it could be land, like hell, it's anything. But I just think moving forward, it has to be something that will address so many years of systematic oppression. And it's beginning to happen. Like, you see these corporations and these firms donating to the Black cause, you know, donating to the Black agenda. And I think once we get to a certain point, we need to continue to keep our foot on the pedestal. Like, I think these politicians, whether you're Democrat or Republican, you need to, I want to see, and I'm gonna say this, I honestly want to see them break the bank on the Black agenda. I think for them and for being used by whether Republican or Democrat throughout the course of our history, I think Black people, I think the Black agenda is old more than anything. Like, it's about time that these politicians break the bank in whatever way, but I hope it should be a competitive bidding for the Black vote. I want to see them break the bank when it comes to getting the Black vote. Because, and I'm gonna wrap up, but if you think about throughout history, who has been there for all of these politicians? It's been what? The Black vote, especially Black women. You know, Black women have been at the forefront of not only addressing civil rights, but also addressing, you know, certain issues for these elected officials and making sure that the word gets out. So I think, you know, this upcoming election, we have so many months available until voting, but until then, they need to start throwing out dollars.
I think we finally got Kai back.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I don't even know. I don't want to mess up the flow. Keep doing your thing.
I had actually, my internet connection got crazy because it's thunderstorming, so I didn't hear the original question. And I think both of the brothers who just shared answered it from two different perspectives. There was a question in the chat that I did see though, and we might want to address that. Francisca said, "As Black men, what do you look for in a culturally competent?" I got issues with that term. I'll talk about that in a minute. Culturally competent therapist or Black therapist when providing support. So I can talk a little bit about that. So I have done therapy myself. I probably needed to have therapy as a child. I definitely had some depression. Now that I've been clinically trained, I'm pretty sure I had major depression probably between the ages of about 11 to about 22, 23 years old. And my level of depression, I utilized it and expressed it through anger. So I didn't shut down per se. It was just having an aggressive outburst towards things. I held a lot of things in, and when I had the right outlets to let them out, I let them out. And usually that was through football field and through football, where it was socially acceptable for me to be an aggressive Black male to utilize my body. But one of the things that's important for us to understand, one, be careful with that term, culturally competent, because competence leads to something that means that you have hit an end, and people will utilize that like they don't need to work on themselves and they don't need to advance their understanding of culture and understand the context of different groups. So be very careful with that term. I know it's an industry term. I utilize the term like culturally responsive. Sometimes I've heard the term cultural humility, but ultimately what we need to be is culturally intelligent. And that is moving beyond cultural competence. And what do you do? Because you can go ahead, you can watch 13th documentary. You know, you can read books by whomever, but that doesn't mean that you're actively working well across cultures or with Black folks. So be very careful with cultural competence. When it comes to looking for a Black counselor, one of the things that I think that you should look for, whether they're Black or not, is make sure that that counselor has enough context on your situation to actually help you. And don't be afraid to fire that therapist if they don't. I always say give a therapist or a clinician about 3 or 4 sessions before you make a determination if it's the right fit for you. Because those first 2 sessions, they're using it for a diagnostic assessment. So they're just trying to figure out where you fit within the DSM-5 now, but whatever DSM they're using. But they're trying to figure out where you fit for a diagnosis. After that, then that's when the work starts to begin, once they kind of build that blueprint on what you've been through and who you are. And even that's not a very culturally responsive tool to understanding what Black people go through, because there is no mental health diagnosis for racism. There is no mental health diagnosis for the things that we experience in our community. And unfortunately, we get mislabeled a lot with PTSD, even though some of us do have it, but a lot of us get that diagnosis. Our children get misdiagnosed with a lot of ADHD or ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder, because they have issues with sitting in class and dealing with authority. But when you have white instructors and white staff telling you to sit down and be quiet, and you already have a cultural context where this person might try to ruin my life or hurt me, you will be oppositionally defiant, right? So we have these things. So be very careful. But when you're looking for a counselor, make sure that they fit what you're looking for. If you're someone who's experienced sexual abuse, make sure that counselor has a background working with people in sexual abuse. That's what's going to help you move forward, whether they're Black, white, or whatever the case may be. Unfortunately, there's not enough Black counselors. That is a field that if you are a young person watching this and you're going to college, you're in school now, even if you don't have a bachelor's in psychology or whatever, you can still become a therapist. So if you're somebody where that calling is helpful for you, you want to do some healing work, you can definitely do it, even though that's not the only way for our people to heal and get better. There's other things that may be even more effective than traditional talk therapy.
Thank you, Brandon. And again, this is definitely a point that I wanted to bring up as far as carrying trauma from our parents. So Brandon, starting off, can you talk a little bit about the impact of intergenerational trauma, how that has impact on the health of Black men, and just the racial stress? Like, can you just talk a little bit about those effects and how that impacts a Black man's day-to-day?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Black men, we've been conditioned to carry ourselves in a paranoid kind of way. Like, we always got to watch what we say, how we say stuff, how we appear, what we're wearing, how we wear our hair, how deep our voice tone is, where to stand, who to stand too close to, who not to stand close to, where to position yourself in the room. Like, these are just normal day-to-day things that Black men have to do just to feel comfortable in spaces. And sometimes them spaces are spaces that may even belong to us. Like, if you own a barbershop, right? You got to make sure everybody's cool. There ain't no issues. How are the barbers doing? Who's coming in here? Who's trying to, who's trying to work one of our barbers so they don't pay us? You got to deal with all that. And then you have to be a businessman, right? And you have to hold a standard. And it's just all these pressures that we end up having to navigate the world that we're in all the time. That is stressful. That creates things like hypertension, which we're high on the list when you break it down for based on ethnicity and gender. Black men, unfortunately, have a mortality rate, we end up dying a lot sooner than our counterparts, Black women, unfortunately, due to that. But we end up having all these concerns and issues because we carry so much stress. The way that we are conditioned to be men, what are men supposed to do? Supposed to provide, protect, and produce, right? Provide, protect, and produce. And it's hard to do that when you're always under scrutiny and the things that you're asked to do are always judged, and at any moment your life can be ended for something meaningless. So it's very stressful and very difficult.
Any of the other panelists, would you like to weigh in on that, the effects of racial stress?
I think, we see it, right? Like he said, it's a level of paranoia, but it's also it's a level of inhumanity, right? This is our whole conditioning and being socially in this society is abnormal, right? And the fact that it's abnormal, we've had to adjust to an abnormal way. So in doing that, we got abnormal ways of thinking and behaving that have now lived up to that, right? So now we live in fear. It's still the plantation, right? We're still under a plantation structure. We're still under the slavery structure society, right? That's speaking to everything they just Brandon and Chris mentioned is that know your placeism, right? You can scratch racism, that know your placeism, right? because when the social construct of race was created in the late 1800s, it was a continuum, a paradigm of black and white, because that's what it was in this country, right? You were designated Negro or white, right? Negro being a Portuguese or Spanish word for black. So now British, the English get here, now it's black. So now black, right? These marks, these labels they put up on, these are brands, right? The names we carry now that were put upon us are brand names that belonging to those plantation owners. This is what enabled them to make money. This is the proof of the reparations that they must atone for, because the crime against the humanity was they stripped the identity of us, right, and made it chattel or commercial or movable property, right, belonging to someone else. So I think when we have to start understanding that we're still in a slavery paradigm, and as such, we still respond and reflect as such. Like he said, fear. I got to worry about walking to the store and a police officer pulling me over saying you fit the description. Then, as we see in videos, they'll pull up. You got 3 or 4 officers yelling 3 different orders at you. Listen at that. Orders. Like you're an animal, right? You respond. You might say, well, what did I do, officer? Get down. You're resisting arrest, right? Right then and there. But then we've seen the videos where they'll pull over our European counterparts and others, and what did I do, officer? Well, ma'am, you went past the light, and we just wanted to just let you know that, and here's a ticket, or however. But every confrontation with the so-called black male in this country, it's a matter of life and death. Period. A simple traffic ticket could go wrong. Just calling the police could go wrong, as we've seen, right? So I think it's very touchy. But I'm not going to use a cop-out or allow us as a people, we're too intelligent to use that, right? So I would say, we've been calling for these cries to defund the police and these type of things. We got to remember that's an aspect of public service, which is funded by our tax dollars. So in essence, these are our jobs as well, right? But because, again, the abnormality of this society and keeping us socially excluded, we begin to socially exclude and socially isolate ourselves as an internal. We're talking about mental health. Remember, once the mind is conditioned to do something, it'll start to automatically program itself. So like he said, again, I don't have to be told I can't apply for a job. When my grandfather, my father, and their father was denied that same job, I'm not going to even think about that job. In fact, I'm not even thinking about the purpose of being educated to even get a job. For what? You know what I mean? And so now this leads to unproductive thinking, unproductive behaviors, right? And that leads to us getting involved in other vices and stuff, all because of, that ties back to identity crisis as well, right? And again, that comes from your inability to organize generationally, right? We had to sneak and meet a lot of the times trying to organize something. You had to sneak and meet. You weren't allowed to organize. You weren't allowed to meet. And it's still like that if we look at the conditionings. Right now, Brandon, Chris, us 3 can walk down the street. What are the chances of us getting pulled over? Right? That probability is very high. very high, right? It's being identified as gang.
I got 3 degrees and it's still high.
Right, it's still a lie. I remember I told a police officer, he asked me one night, I pulled over. I told him, listen, I don't have time to get in trouble. I'm working on my doctorate. He said, oh yeah, well, so am I. Being sarcastic. So I just laughed it off. And but even that, it's for one, you're always lying, you're a criminal, or you have a criminal record. Right? Those 3 stigmas we're always plugged into, no matter what. You got a record, you're not educated. So a lot of these stereotypes, you're violent. A lot of these stereotypes come to play, and we got to keep in mind we're still kind of living off the turn of the century narratives in the 1900s with that what was the film, Rebirth of a Nation or something, whatever, when they depicted that, right? That began the narrative and the justification of criminalizing and dehumanizing the so-called black male in this country, right? Because then the threat then was, being years removed from a plantation, and then the period of Reconstruction. And even then we have to start researching those periods more, because, I was always under the assumption, we were slaves, we were ignorant. And then up pops a poster of the Louisiana State Assembly from like 1860 something, right? And there's majority African Americans sitting on there. Same thing with the state of Mississippi. Same thing with the state of Georgia, Alabama, Virginia, all of these states, right? But we were miseducated and told we were slaves. But you couldn't just come out of slavery and go and be a politician. You couldn't come out of slavery and be the sheriffs. You couldn't come out of slavery and be the tradesman, right? These are skills that you had to have, right? So in essence of those skills being exploited and then kind of restricted during those time frames, and here we are 3-4 generations later, where trying to find our way into the economy and access the labor market, and we're still blocked out. And we've had brothers like Booker T come along, Marcus Garvey, and the nationalist perspective, but I think often that narrative gets lost because it became so radical, quote unquote radical. Something that's telling you to self-help and be self-determined became radical. But again, that speaks to the mind frame we were under, right? To where that was a dangerous mindset, right? We seen what it got Marcus Garvey, right? They called him a Negro agitator, right? And got him, all the other conspiracy stuff started going down, but not to overtalk it. So when we consider that, we got to remember these thought processes and the mental paradigm we're under right now is still fear-based. Even the narrative being shown on TV, it's all fear-based, right? We might see it and get outraged. Well, that evokes a response. If you want to be taken seriously, let's go silent and start meeting more and come out with more tangible things to say, you know what? Don't worry about sending us a Democrat or a Republican. Chris, you're our candidate. All this money we spend in our community, we can go spend it on Hennessy, we can go spend it on rims, we can go spend it on Jordans, we can go spend it on iPhones, iPads, AirPods, you name it, right? But we can't take $50, $20 a month a person and put toward a campaign for a political action committee, right? And you start to spawn your own candidates. We need our own economic interests. We need our own self-determination agenda. We keep talking about a black agenda. Nobody's coming to push our agenda. Nobody's going to push our agenda but us, right? So these politics, because it's always going to become a conflict of interest when you get into the office and the money, because again, we're predicated on the ability to earn and access social and economic resources. These are our functionalities of citizenship. We can't earn, we can't access social and economic resources equitably. And it's purposefully and by design. That's social exclusion, the social isolation, and this all ties into what they call the concentrated poverty stuff, right? So we're talking about a social structure that needs to be cracked, but we first have to crack that. We have to rehumanize our own experience amongst ourselves. Like I see these brothers, and I'm proud to see brothers that's out here uplifting and doing work to bring about awareness of the issues, because this is rehumanizing our face. It's bringing humanity to a people, right? And we got a long way to go, right? Because then a lot of things we have to create pertaining to our identity have to become authentic, purely authentic, right? We get back to these the Pan-African ideals, but it's about being purely authentic and saying we have to remove the ideals of colonization and those who brought those ideas with them, with that system. And again, I apologize for getting long-winded, but I'm passionate about this stuff, and I'm just excited to be a part of this platform. But that was my take on that. And as we go forward, we keep that in mind, that this abnormal experience and this paradigm has us thinking and acting abnormally. In other words, outside of who we really are.
Great. Thank you for that. Curtis, anything you'd like to add? I do have a question, but before I do that, is there anything you want to?
Just a quick point about, the whole trauma, the generational trauma. I look at it as a code or survival. Like my folks would tell me, well, you don't need to be out in this area, or be careful when you're doing such and such. It's just a code or survival because of stuff that they had to deal with. They knew that if they were going to certain neighborhoods, they had to, or they were around certain people, they had to operate in a way that was uncomfortable, but they were forced to conform, just because they wanted to survive. Like, during certain times, if you were walking on the same side of if a black person was walking on the same street, on the same side of the street as a white man, they would have to cross and go to the other side of the street. You were also told not to talk black. Not to talk back, excuse me, or talk black for that matter. You was also told that there were so many stigmas that was put in place that address Black people, and that I think caused a certain, an extra level of I guess trauma or mental health issues, because if you have to always be on code, even when you're outside, that really affects you. And so that being put, your ancestors, parents, grandparents, or whatever, being raised in that certain type of structure had sort of put that on, this current generation, because it was more of a way that they were thinking or trying to teach them how to survive, because that's how they were told. So I just think that being passed down. But the good thing about us in the position that we're in right now, we have the opportunity to crack that. And that ties back to your first question about the depiction or the image of Black men, Black people as of right now. I feel like one of the tangible goals, or one of the things that's going to happen as a result of this awakening, is that there are going to be a normality when it comes to being Black. Thinking about Ahmaud Arbery, of course, and I'm going to wrap up soon. Ahmaud Arbery, this man was murdered because of individuals who felt that he was not welcome in the neighborhood. He was a Black man, a Black boy, just going for a jog through a neighborhood, and they didn't recognize who he was. So that type of structure, and even going back to Amy Cooper about this Black man is going to tell me that I need to obey the law. Who are you to tell me what I need to do? I'm a grad of a top institution. I'm making this much money. Yes, who are you going to tell me I need to put my dog on the leash? You need to get back in your lane, boy. So that whole concept of never talking back to to white people, because our parents never did that. And I think with them having that type of anger and that frustration was sort of instilled in us as people, they would take that out on us because it would be held. They were treated in a certain way by society, and basically they would kind of put that energy towards us so that we can always think 2 steps ahead of the game, survive. Okay, I know I have to think a certain way, talk a certain way, be a certain way, when I'm out in public, because one, I don't want any pre-assumptions based on me as a person because of my Black culture and my Blackness. I don't want to come across as being the angry Black man or the angry Black woman. I don't want to come across as being, stupid because my enunciation, I don't have perfect quote unquote command of the English language. So I think just all of those things that we deal with, our generation deals with, I think we're beginning to address it. And I know moving forward, we have a lot of resources available, and I think slowly but surely we're going to come together and as a people and learn how to destroy these certain barriers that we have on us mentally, so that we can address this trauma that's been in place and been passed down through generations. That's just my 2 cents.
No, thank you for that, Curtis. And we do have some questions in the chat I want to get to. And this question that I'm going to ask kind of leads into that. So when we see what's going on as far as Black men, George Floyd and others, and we see this whole Black Lives Matter, the marches and demonstrations that are going on. But I'm going to be careful how I say this.
Don't be careful.
But within this, it seems like we're still losing the conversation about Black men and the pain that they go through, right? The trauma. My experience as a Black woman is much different than your experience, right? And so what led me to want to do this event is just the research that I've done as far as trauma, intergenerational trauma. And at one point I had looked up support groups for men just that were dealing with trauma. And that was non-existent. And then for Black men, it was just there was absolutely nothing, right? So when we start to have a conversation about healing, we have to also make sure that there's actually spaces for Black men to go to begin to heal. So I guess my question is to you, we have these large scale movements that are built on the pain of Black men or the death of Black men, but yet when we're having a conversation about moving forward, Black men are not in the picture. For example, I just saw an image, I think it was on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine, which is a Black woman with a little Black boy. I don't see a Black man in the photo, just George Floyd on a picture of him on her shirt. And can you guys speak to me, like, why do you think that happens? It's almost like the silencing of Black men, but building movements on their death. Can you speak to that a little bit? Anyone can kick that off.
So just a quick point on that, and I'll let the brothers speak. So there were certain policies that were put in place to certain government subsidies that were put in place for families to be eligible to apply. You had to provide one source of income. So that right there was a shift in terms of, I think, the whole narrative about Black women, or I'm not going to say Black women, I'm going to say women not needing a father figure in the home. So that is just one instance of something that I think contributed to like the breakup of the Black male household. You know, I'm fortunate. I've been raised by an amazing household. I have amazing men who were there to show me the way. You know, from strong, powerful individuals. From my, you know, not only with my father, you know, stepfather figures, my uncles as well, who also showed me certain things. And I just give a shout out to my uncle Calvin, RP. Thank you, I love you. But just to show like there were certain things that needed to take place, and you know how to be a man and raise a family. Like and now that we're in a position, we begin to understand like yes, you need both. But I think it's all about, like, one thing to point out, it's all about framing. You got to understand when you see certain images and people displaying these things, they're framing it in a way that addresses the Black community. Like that whole image, and like now I see on TV, you know, you see certain things that are displayed where it really doesn't like promote the Black family, you know. And I'm all for who you want to be with. Like honestly, I think that's not my point that I'm trying to take with this, but just like I don't really see that being promoted in the light in which it should, especially right now. And I could be wrong, you know, but based on some of the sources that I've seen, I have not seen it as much as it's needed.
What was the question again? Sorry, I just want to make sure because Curtis took me in other ways that I was thinking about it, so I want to make sure I addressed it.
Yeah, so it's just looking at movements. So, and thanks for that, Curtis. So looking at movements that are built off of the death, or we know you see police officers and some of their actions against Black men. So it's this violence against Black men that we see. And so movements will be based on that. You know, funding will happen because of that. But then when the funding is received or the movement starts to gain traction, it's as though Black men's, their voices are excluded from the conversation. So I just wanted to get your sense of why that occurs. And that will lead into our question as far as some solutions. But I just want to get your opinion as to why it occurs, and then we can figure out how to go from there.
Yeah. For me, you know, Black men we've never been in a position from a societal standpoint to oppose the environment. If you look at any society in history, men oppose environments, whether that's through war, whether that's through policy, whether that's through siege, men do that. And Black men, there's an understanding, and there's what I think, and this is where a lot of that white guilt and fear comes from, is there's a fear that there will be retaliation for the things that have happened in this country to Black people. And if Black men organize, that poses a big threat to what we understand this whole world of United States to be, and America to be. But think about if Black men came together and we were able to impose this environment, that changes our economic industry. As we see right now, ESPN shifted all their talking points, talk about Kyrie Irving, talking about we shouldn't be playing. They're like, nope, we need to get them brothers back on that court down in Orlando and playing basketball, shoot them hoops. Because economically, we can't sustain that. And they know that entertainment is necessary to make sure the American people can divert from continuing to do things like protest, riots, etc. So men oppose environments. That's not a nag towards women or anything like that. It's just what it is as far as human nature. So Black men organizing is a threat to how we understand and see this country. Also, one thing that has historically happened to us, every time we make political pushes and movements, our issues and our points get conflated with other groups, and it's already happening. We're not talking, I mean, we went from Black Lives Matter to BIPOC. And for folks who don't know what BIPOC is, that's Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Now, that's fine. We should have things for everybody. But if we're talking about the response to George Floyd, how do we go from Black men being murdered to police to we need to have solutions for everybody and be more inclusive? They don't do that with other groups, right? They're not going to do that with Pride. They're not going to do that right now. They're not going to do that particular type of thing because those groups have political organization. And if you try to do that, there will be some type of ramification. So as Black men, we have to put ourselves in that same position. But unfortunately, due to our trauma, and this goes back to one of the later questions, we have a level of anti-Blackness that doesn't allow us to organize the way that we should, because we have this contention with one another that we continue to bump heads, and it's hard for us to organize. Where do you see Black men organized for the most part in a large collective outside of sports, outside of a fraternity? Where are we organized? And we have to, and then where there's limited or no conflict. That's one thing that we have to work on as brothers, taking care of ourselves first individually, and then figuring out how do we socialize and build moving forward. And that's something that we have to be diligent on. And that starts internally with us. And I'll pause there for somebody else.
That's good. I think both of the brothers gave an excellent explanation. I just jotted down some key points I just wanted to touch on. But to bring it back, I think, again, the historical roots, I think we lose the importance of history, right? Because a lot of time we let people discourage us to say it don't matter. But yet when you go to court, they look at your criminal history. You go to your doctor, they look at your medical history. You go to school, they look at your educational history, right? So as a people, socially and historically, we got to examine this historical relationship. So when you ask that question as to why would they remove the male of another race from that family structure, in essence, is to kill the nation of that people, right? If the family is the cornerstone to a nation. And with the male absent from that home, a woman and child is left to fend for themselves. We've now left our women to be compromised, right? So much so, the only culture in American society where the women out earn the men, the African Americans, right? So think about that. So your image, the imagery of the masculine has been destroyed. Well, I'm gonna say has been destroyed, but it's not revered and it's not gonna be reflected and shown and celebrated. That's up to us to do. And in the same manner, as I'm a part of the Moorish Science Temple of America, right? And part of our paradigm from our founder was we had to gain a respect for womanhood, right? And learn because in that interest of protecting the women, you automatically now think to protect your children and your family, but most importantly, yourselves. Because as men, we now have a common interest to protect and secure. Right? And as Brother Malcolm said, we got to stop being chumps. We got to stand up. Right? And no, we don't mean, oh, get out and have to shoot guns. No, it means you got to organize yourself. You got to plan strategically. Right? That's the best way to keep our kids and women out of harm's way, is to start to organize ourselves. And so we can no longer, as he said, anytime our movements gain steam, they get infiltrated by other agendas, as I mentioned at the top of the show. That's only happening because we haven't put up, as Dr. Claude Anderson said, a cultural fence around our community. Close our business off to everybody else. And it might seem far-fetched, but really it's not. Because if in the 50s and 60s, they can do a boycott and shut down cities, we can now take a new age approach when we boycott and recirculate that dollar amongst us. We got $1.8 trillion spent $1.8 trillion in spending power, which is enough to put us top 5 nations of spending. There's no excuse to not have our own hospitals, our own schools, our own institutions to address the issues that we are being failed at by relying on others to do it for us or to help us. Again, and as my study and my work continue, one of the areas I've looked at that's becoming apparent as we evolve in society with the functionality of citizenship due to the globalization of the economies now is the idea of self-determination, because now inequality and poverty, as my research show, are now social conditions whereby groups of people are literally going to be marginalized if they lack the ability to organize in order to access resources socially and economically. Now, what do I mean in comparison? And this all data you can Google, since Google, everyone is a Google scholar now. You can Google and see. Think about this. The average new American that moves here, the average takes 4 years to get out of poverty. 4 years to get out of poverty. Meanwhile, native-born African Americans, on average, are stuck in the same census tracts in poverty on average for 40 years. For 40 years. Now, again, these are studies going from the 70s to 2000, 2010, where they're examining the cross census tract and they're watching the income levels fall. They're watching the population. They're watching the deterioration. But yet the same people are remaining in these communities. Right? And we can't say we don't have money. We got money. It's a matter of how are we spending our money? Where are we directing our dollars? Same thing on a local level politically. It's no longer about who are we going to support, but who supports us. And the most authentic answer to that is the people you raise amongst yourselves to be the representatives of you. That's democracy. That's democracy. And we see the reflection of that in New York City now. The tone of that, of their city councils or even New York State Assembly, is almost a reflection now of a mini UN. You have whole conclaves that have carved out areas in these cities now to where traditionally they were, other cultural neighborhoods. So now, you can go somewhere in Queens where, and it's a mansion on a block in Queens, right? And in a couple of these areas across New York City, and people in those areas that watching live can chime in, but we really have to adopt that. And people may feel it's radical, but it's nonsensical, and it's really the first order of the day. I mean, again, the First Amendment guarantees your right to organize. And again, historically, that's what's been disrupted amongst our people in this society, is our ability to organize authentically, right? Organize and speak without someone of European descent being around. And it's not being non-inclusive or being that oxymoronic statement of reverse racism. But I can break down that conversation as well. You want to talk about the concept of race. If you believe in the ideology of race, we're talking racism, because it's something that's applied, it's applicable. So if we live within this racial paradigm, we'll always be on the short end of the stick, because in that paradigm, if you are deemed non-European, then you are, in a sense, less human than they are. Which is why the ante is being upped in America, because you have cultures that are here in America now that are dark as us and being called white. They're being called white, right? So again, like I said, we have to look at the legal statuses of a lot of this and the functionality of citizenship as it pertains to us. And a lot of citizenship is not obligatory, but we also have to contribute. Right? We always want you not just benefit from the system, but we have to, I don't want to say infiltrate, but you have to be, like Garvey said, government is ours. We should participate. More avid and more apparent than anyone else, because we're being left out. So that much so, next year, lines of kids should be lined up for the police academy. Kids should be lined up for firefighters academy, EMT academy. Oh, if we can't do it, the most powerful organization you could put together is the PTO. So your teachers union can't stand up to at the end of the day. You're the parent. You determine what's being taught to our children. You boycott the system. We'll pull out of the schools and create our own schools. We need more African-centered schools, right? Because we have to reshape a purpose of educating our children. We can't just no longer tell them to go get an education and get a good job. You're not getting a good job. Period. Right? It's our job to provide jobs to our kids. It was disheartening, and I had to really pay attention to the language that our people use in the community, right? And one that kind of struck a chord was when people would stand up and be outraged and say, well, they're not giving our kids jobs. And it made me feel bad because from then I realized the importance of us starting and creating businesses. Now, granted, it's not for everybody. But in that case, when you take on occupations, become influential in your positions. This is why we need to emphasize, getting into these jobs or getting but we have to do it in a sense where it's beneficial to us to educate our children so they see the purpose in it. Stop telling kids, oh, don't be police. No, you're the chief of police. I see you as the chief of police. I see you as the mayor. I see you as the governor. I see you as the DA. Right? We have to put bigger aspirations. But because of the societal structure, as Chris and Brandon spoke on earlier, a lot of our behaviors have become self-limiting. And so much so, we've pushed ourselves to the margins of society, right? And we got to fight to get back, but we can't do it individually. We got to do it collectively. And as far as the men go, we're the vanguards, man, to our communities. And we have to stop being chumps. We have to step up and organize. I don't need permission to organize with nobody. Chris, Brandon, we can exchange numbers. We can call Meek, put a couple of dollars together and go create an organization, right? Go out and get support and do this stuff. It starts with a small group. I think, we get away from this larger thinking, the kumbaya, it's not going to work. Every movement has a small core members of people that moves it forward, that change the world, right? And I think with that, because we've been so victimized and so brutalized and so beat and oppressed, and that the hopelessness sets in. And out of hopelessness, you freeze, right? And that's the big thing of trauma. You get frozen. It's a frozen psychological state. You become frozen in. And now you talk intergenerational. Now that's that. Don't talk back to the white man when he say something to you, boy. Right? It could be simple as trying to explain yourself. Don't you explain yourself, right? So we condition now to accept a paternalistic interaction. Boy, you can't be a man, boy. It's a one-way street in communication, right? And that used to bother me as a kid. Like, my grandmother was from the deep South, Georgia, right? So she would tell me all these stories. I remember as a boy, she told me the Emmett Till story. And speaking of, like Brandon said, that anger, I'm internally starting to get more and more angry. I see pictures of Emmett Till, all because he looked at a white girl, he whistled at a white girl, whatever the story was, right? And I used to tell my grandmother it would infuriate me. She would be like, well, you do this and do that. And it always come down to, well, why do I have to do what they say, right? So now naturally you grow up rebellious, and that rebelliousness unchecked, we begin to socially isolate ourselves and begin to engage in a lot of these behaviors that are unproductive and criminal, right? So we celebrate and our behaviors become criminalized. So we become a culture where we're celebrating criminal behavior, which is subhuman, in a sense, inhumane. So now it's justifying the destruction of the male imagery because look, they could put up rappers, they could put up all these glorified images and say, well, what is the purpose of them? They don't want to work, they don't want to do this, all these stereotypes, right? We have to reshape that narrative. We have to become more responsible for telling our own story. And even on this, Kai, I love it. You provide a platform so we as men can talk, right? But you got to be more than just talk, man. And I love it because this is a part of rehumanizing our experiences, to treat ourselves as men, not to see you as a nigga, as a man that's not worth anything, but you have a lot of wisdom to impart on me, and to our community, and we have to value that.
No, thank you for that. Before I ask my next question, Curtis, anything you want to add?
No, I'm good to go. That brother, he hit on all cylinders with that answer. So yeah, man, you hit that out the park. I was just sitting here listening, and definitely, I jotted down a lot of notes. So thank you.
Thank you both. So I do want to talk about the healing process. And Terrence, you raised some really good points, and I think a lot of in my opinion, when for people to come together, it's helpful for them to do the self work first. So that way, when you come together, you can put together a strategy and really be constructive. So I wanted to get, we can start either with Curtis or Brandon. I wanted to talk about the importance of what does it mean for Black men? Like, how do you begin to heal in such an environment? Like, it's not as though, typically if someone is in a environment that is not healthy, we first want to remove them from that environment and then start to begin some work, right? Instead of keeping them in a very toxic situation. Unfortunately, we are unable to really change their environment that we live in. And I mean, we're still going to deal with racism. So how can Black men start their own internal healing process? Still, obviously there's still things that are going on as far as with police and just being a Black man in this country. There's nothing that can immediately change that. But what are some things that for the Black men that are listening right now that they can start to do to begin their healing journey? In addition to that, I just wanted to also go back to a question that was raised about establishing a rites of passage for our youth. So first, I want to just bring the attention to Black men, what they can do for their healing journey, and then also get your thoughts about rites of passage for our youth.
I'll lead off. So, to me, one of the things that we have to do for both of those questions is acknowledge that there are elements of our culture as Black folks that are toxic. And we have to just be real about that. We have a high level of anti-Blackness. We have a high level of infighting. We have a high level of harming one another. And if we're not going to be honest about that, it doesn't matter what type of white supremacy we want to go up against or any economic factors that we want to have, because we're going to continue to have this level of anti-Blackness where we will not be able to make collective change. When it comes to healing, I use a framework that I call the ABCs of resiliency. The A is what we call adaptive awareness. And adaptive awareness is all about being honest with yourself and understanding the situation that you are in, whether that's racism, white supremacy, dealing with trauma that has happened in your family, dealing with stuff at work. You have to acknowledge that what it is, and if it is painful, what kind of pain it has caused for you. So just keeping it 100 with yourself is the first step in that. Then we move to the B, which is balance and boundaries. So you need to find balance between the I versus the we, balance between your logic versus your emotions, balance between your time and your energy, balance between all these things that take place in your life. How do you find balance in that? And then how do you set boundaries, right? Because one of the unfortunate things as Black folks, is our gift and our curse, is we are very open people. We love and take care of everybody. Black women do it and Black men. And sometimes we do it in spite of ourselves. And sometimes we need to have boundaries and be able to say no to things. And sometimes that's your family. You might have to say no to your family, which is hard for Black folks to do. But sometimes it's necessary for you to move forward, grow, and heal. We have to be able to take care of ourselves and set boundaries. Saying no is not the only boundary. There's other things as well. But that is one of the big things that I notice is people just, they overextend themselves when they probably shouldn't do it. Another thing to find balance in is your compassion versus your accountability. Sometimes Black men are held accountable way too quickly without any compassion. And sometimes we hold ourselves accountable way too quickly without any compassion. We have to be able to find some balance within that as well. And then ultimately, the C is for consistent, constructive choices. So one of the things we talk about healing, I see people, they'll try something, it works, and then they'll go back to the old behavior. They'll try something, it works, and they go right back. And it's like, what happened? Why won't you do it? Because that consistency is very hard. Because when you are trying to get better and when you are trying to heal, it is uncomfortable. It's just like working out. I've been out of the gym for like 2 months, and I know when I hit that gym tomorrow, I'm be hurting. I'm be hurting afterwards. But that's the pain that I have to go through to be healthier, to grow and move forward. It's the same thing from a mental and emotional standpoint. You got to grow. And there's no growth in the comfort zone, and there's no comfort in the growth zone. And that consistency is very hard for people. Why is that consistency hard? Because when you start to change, the people around you start to change. They start to respond to you different. And that's uncomfortable for folks. It's like, they don't see you the same way that they used to see you. And some people can't live with that shift in their identity in that dynamic. So when you talk about healing, we always have to be real with ourselves. We have to find balance within our lives. We have to have boundaries in our life. We need to make sure that our actions are consistent, and we continue, and they're constructive, right? So we can't be consistent with the non-constructive stuff. We have to do things that are important. And then the second question was about rites of passages. One of the things that we're going to have to move forward from, and this is going to be something that people don't want to hear, but it's a reality. We have to move forward on what does a rites of passage look like in 2020? Because it's not just taking boys out in the wood and treating them, all types of crazy so that they can grow and develop to be men. Rites of passage may look like apprenticeships. Rites of passage may look like having healing circles and allowing young men to have voice and reason and not telling him to shut up, little nigga, you don't know what you're talking about. Rites of passage looks different in 2020, and we have to be able to evolve beyond the old things that don't work anymore. These young boys are out here hurting because they don't have opportunities. They don't see the impacts that they put out in the world that are positive, highlighted, and they don't have role models. And those are the places that we have to start. We're talking about rites of passage for these boys. I'm getting to a point where I'm getting sick of having young boys cry to me because they like their basketball or their football coach, and then they stop wanting to play sports because the coach is trying to have sex with their mom. Okay? Like, we got to get to a place where we have healthy role models and healthy black men that are out here showing how to be a black man, and stop condemning these boys for who they are, because the models they have, you don't control those models. Somebody else does, and they'll put whatever image they want to put in front of them unless you're going to hold yourself to a standard that is respectable for these black men. With that, I will yield.
Curtis, Terrence, you want to weigh in here?
I don't know how to follow up with that, but that was a great answer. Yeah, definitely, Brandon. That was dope. Only thing I did just touch on that point is that I think it's good for men to, like, I think it's good for us to acknowledge that something is wrong. Like, truthfully speaking, understand that we have certain areas, because and I had mentioned this to Kyle offline. So, I listened to this song. And one of the things that Music Soul Child, stuck with me when I was growing up was that I was taught the true definition of a man is to never cry. Work till you tired. You got to provide. Like, that line right there resonated with me to the point to where I even stuck in my mind. Like, I just wanted to develop this sense of, I'm not going to show emotion. I'm just going to stay, tough. I have to appear in a certain way where I'm not bothered by anything. And I think having that mindset, it's sort of like it forced me to be very standoffish to the point to where things that would bother me was so built in to the point to where it starts to leak out eventually, and I have certain outbursts and develop relationships, in ways, act out that ways that didn't seem normal when it came to how I just would associate with other people. So I think one of the first things that we as a people can do, whether it be black men, black women, is to acknowledge the rights of, what's wrong and the faults that we have. Because in order for us to truly move forward, we need to know, like, okay, this is not appropriate behavior. This is all that I know, but I'm willing to sit back, learn, and address this issue that I have. Because obviously there has been a pattern that has been displayed over the course of this certain time, whether it be people that I've dealt with, whether it's past relationships, understanding, like, why do I keep falling in this circle with people who obviously are not staying in my life for a long periods of time, or why is it hard to be vulnerable in certain cases? So, going back to what Brandon was saying, I think one of the things we need to do is first and foremost acknowledge that we do have certain issues and certain things that need to be addressed. No one is perfect, for that matter. It's okay to put yourself out there and to be vulnerable. And also, it's all right to love family from a distance. That's one thing that he touched on as well. Be very protective of your space, your spirit, your time, and your energy, because that's important. We love our family. We have close ones who we love and we dear, but we also understand that we have to love them from a distance, or take them in certain moments, certain periods, whether it be 5-10 minutes, going, trips or whatever. You can set that up yourself. So I think those are two ways to address it. And in terms of the rites of passage, I agree with Brandon. Again, I know I'm piggybacking off you, but you dropped a lot of bombs, brother. But I think it's important to identify positive role models. I think we all can relate to the coach who, tried to be too cool, whatever, but really he didn't understand, because sometimes that's all is what he knows. So I think those are ways which we can address it. And yeah, I think that's how we deal with the creating a rite of passage the right way.
Yeah, I'll add on. I must say, man, both you guys. I mean, like chemistry tonight in a sentence as far as on point. I mean, it shows, the common because of our shared experiences, a lot of the observations and things that come out of this. But I wanted to get back, especially because Brandon kind of brought this whole thing home when you talk about healing, and those tenements of what he talked about. So I think we're talking about here, for one, what the so-called black male in America deals with, the identity crisis, right? Because our identity ties us to our purpose and our function in society. And I think when the imagery is always slavery and criminal and uh, nothing, the images we get fed with, right, is depressing, right? It angers you, it fuels you, right? But it's somewhere in there that little glimpse of hope we got in our community, right? Everybody, these guys, when they tell you need knowledge of self, right? And that knowledge of self, as we know and understand, it comes to understanding yourself. That's one of the most powerful things, because Brandon touched on it. We don't establish and build that self-love for ourselves. Trying to interact with people is a little difficult, right? Because you're volatile yourself. So dealing with other people, it's really a level of volatility and defensiveness there, right? That's why you go into school, you hear a sister talking with an administrator, and that one wrong comment that come out that principal mouth, this sister about to go off, right? And then you hear it, boom. And now it's she crazy, right? Same thing with men. As soon as they see us, it's automatic threat. And you open your mouth, and what they, because we want to project the image of masculinity, right? How we define it socially, of trying to take care of your family or even being disciplined. They'll reverse that and say, we're toxic. We're being toxic, right? But yet they'll turn around and celebrate the European male that does that, right? The machismo and the bravo-ness that come in Irish community, Italian community, Russian community, right? They got their little things that they do that set them amongst men. They go to their pubs, drink, go out, brawl, go get done, go have some more drinks together, laugh it off, right? But we lack that cultural identity connect. I get mad at you, Chris. I'm gonna gun you down when we leave out of here, right? That becomes a mentality. I'm gonna kill you because I hate myself. That internal hate is so strong, right? Because we as a people have to learn to love ourselves. That's the most powerful healing factor we got. And it's not mushy, because that type of love is going to take discipline. But we talking about sitting down and really organizing ourselves to the point of saying, man, this has to be purely for us, right? 400-500 years of political economic plight in this country. Nobody's been helping us. It had that same way hasn't been working. We keep trying the same things over and over and over, expecting different results, right? We got to do different things if we want to see things done differently. And a lot of that, of course, is our approach, but it starts with us first, right? We're trying to take on a system. You kind of got to utilize the Matrix analogy, right? We got to become a virus, meaning we have to have a purposeful design to attack something, and attack it strategically and tactically, right? To the point of the revolution, of course, is not televised because it's an education process. It's a change of thinking, because our thoughts are wrong. We're thinking wrong. We have to begin to think with a program of human development, right? Focusing on our basic needs: food, clothes, shelter, and mental well-being, health and wellness, right? We have to focus on building institutions and conversations around those first, essentially, right? And understanding that our identity and our purpose is tied together. So love and unity is the key, but they take that discipline. We need that strong program of discipline, to restore our families, to restore ourselves. And because the basis for organizing our people is to attain the highest ideal of a people, which is nationhood, where there's collective interests on the table that we're protecting. And as Brother Malcolm said in the quote on the post I have, if you're not ready to die for it, take the word freedom out your mouth. Get it out your vocabulary, because it don't mean anything to you. It could be compromised. So we have to kind of take a sacrificial lamb approach, but we can get out of that now, because the ideal is to institutionalize our ways of thinking and these strategies. Institutionalize them in the sense you're creating organizations and programs that now are centered around educating, and not just educating, but being effectuating changes, whether that's policy or amongst young men. And Brandon, that idea you had, the rites of passage in 2020 should look like apprenticeships, healing circles. Spot on, brother. Like that's what that should look like nowadays. And even going out, showing them the basics of being a man, because we've been plagued with this single mother household thing for a generation or two now. So a lot of the young men are more hypersensitive, right? So if you try to offer them advice or criticize them, it's not easily taken, right? It's an automatic defense mechanism that goes up, right? Because of the trauma, the traumatic experience is intergenerational, especially that's been heaped upon the Black boys in this country. And we know all the works that's out there on that, the purposeful designs. I think we got to start to reorganize ourselves with a purposeful design to go in to attack each system, whether it's economic development, whether it's health, whether it's police, whether it's whatever area, every area that's we're disproportionately represented in, because historically we've been kept out. And that's that know your placeism. So, and we do it to ourselves. If our children say, I've heard it, and it's very discouraging, I want to be a doctor. Oh, you don't want to be a doctor. There's too much school for that. Yeah. Besides, you ain't that smart anyway. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. You're going to kill your kid's dream. That's a lot of intelligence there. We come from intelligence, right? History is our guidepost, as Marcus Garvey said. So we can go back and look at all these empires and look at all these medicine that came from us. Right? And no matter what that's not being taught in school, no matter what's not being said, a lot of these math and sciences, and even to this day, the highest math and science scores are in the African continent. That doesn't get broadcast, right? Even in America, the highest math and science scores are amongst African descent students. But those are not broadcast and celebrated. So we need our own media platforms to celebrate this stuff, to tell the story. We need more podcasts like this, allowing for voices to not only be heard, but this is also networking, which builds our social capital, because we need to know people and places and how to access resources so we can come back to the community to help, right? That's the job of the talented 10th, the ideal of it. For those that have that ability and the intellect to access and get and utilize these resources, we got to help it benefit the people that are willing to work, but might not have that capacity to come out and start a business, but are willing to go to bat. And Brandon, start your apprenticeship, and you got a brother that's a carpenter that knows carpentry in and out, that can take a young man and educate him on how to, be crafty at being a carpenter, or being an electrician, right? We have all these different trades that we have to reacclimate ourselves to, because these are the basis for nation building and also the basis for industry in our community. If we don't have anything to build, what are you working on? And we'll sit around and hope for others to hire us to come build their communities. If you're not building your own community, nobody's going to hire you to build their community. Right. So again, and I take a lot of approach, like you said earlier, because a lot of our perspective, our thinking has been wrong. And we've had people to come and hint at the right ways to do it. But I think we're in an age now where you have no choice left but to begin to say, okay, we've tried it, but we, like you said, the consistency there with it, it's like, okay, it worked, it got us this far, that's it. But then other people take that struggle and take that plight and keep pushing that agenda forward to benefit themselves, right? And then you have all these spinoff groups come out, but then only one or two really gain a lot of political, influence and reforms in areas. I'll say peace on that.
No, very, very good points. Thank you for that. So one thing, and I know we're going a little over time, for everyone that's on our panelists, do you have a few more minutes? I just have two other questions that I think would be good for us to go over if you're good with time. Good, okay. So one, Terrence, you kind of brought this up as far as our young Black boys that are maybe growing up in a single parent household. So I want to speak, we talked to as far as what Black men, what they can begin to do for their healing journey, what can start to be done for Black boys. But in this conversation, I did want to bring in the role that Black women play. So we have seen what is playing out on mainstream media, where it's just kind of like Black men and Black women. The media is really pushing this war, this having us at odds. I keep seeing reports of how come one victim, a Black woman who was killed by police, why is she getting less attention than a Black male who got killed? But I mean, that is a conversation that we should not have, who's getting more attention from being killed by a police officer. I think that is a distraction, and it's taking us away from the actual issue that we need to be addressing. So I want to know, what role do Black women play, not only in this conversation of healing, so what would be helpful for us to do, but also what role do Black women play in the self-esteem and self-worth when they're raising Black boys? Is that question clear?
And to me, that's very clear. I
Okay.
think it's very, very warranted. I'm trying to be strategic in how I answer this, right? Because I don't want to take it in the wrong way.
Just say what you gotta say, brother.
Hey,
Don't
man.
say
This is the
See,
return of the kings. This is Black Men Speak, and we're listening.
Okay, so here it is, and I'm just gonna shoot it out there. I mean, how can you as for better speak, we say Asiatic original woman, but you're the original being, right, in existence. You're the closest thing to God, right? You create without the sound of a hammer or nail, right? You build body, you build his body, you give birth to us. When that son, that king, that prince gets here, you have to cultivate that energy. But again, we're in a society where that energy has been offsetting. So now, you're in protective mode of your son, right? So sons are raised in fear. Our masculinity is not celebrated. Instead, it's hindered. It's like when you sense that, right? Because that's the energy that gets you kicked out of school. That's the energy that makes you talk back, right? That even though you're just asking questions. So what happens, you have to cultivate love that son. But I think that conflict come down to the drama of the relationships, right? Because we're not evolved enough yet in our relationship to where it has purpose and an economical value of meaning when we our families are together.
Did he freeze up or?
Yeah, he froze up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think you froze up.
How you going? Yeah, here.
There
All right, we froze.
There we go.
I lost y'all.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
Go ahead.
So that value, right? So intrinsically, our value toward each other, we don't see any long standing. It's just like I don't know. It's no purpose. It's a house built on no foundation, right? So it's not going to stand so long. And that's because the man and the woman, we're at odds because there's no common thread to keep us on a solidarity, right? To say because our ancestors set the bar for us to interact this way as a man and as a woman. And there's an expectation we have to raise our children with purpose, right? So you're talking about restoring this feeling. As I said earlier, one of the tenements we take pride in is you have to have a deeper appreciation for womanhood, because once women are secure in themselves, it allows her to love us properly and respect our manhood. But we have to stand up and be men. Stop being chumps. Stop coming up with excuses. Stop trying to make and say, all right, you know what? It's the last time this going to happen in our community. Next time a police shooting happen, I know what we're going to do. Ain't no marching, ain't no protesting. We're gonna meet at our local community center. We're gonna get this petition. We're gonna call this local councilman down here to talk about this. He or she don't want to do nothing. You're out of here. Same thing, police and chief, or you're politically appointed. And again, these are our tax dollars. Do not be afraid to chase your own money. It's our money. I'm paying you to wear that badge. I pay you. I don't have to make $100,000, $200,000. A homeless person go in the store and buy a bottle of water. You pay tax on that. You go buy a piece of candy. You paying tax on that, right? Clothes, whatever. You pay tax into a system. That tax structure, that tax system is what's financing the public contracts that the police take on, these police unions take on, that these school unions take on. It's a matter of public contract. It's our money. I'm not going to keep sitting and asking you to do something that I'm paying you. If that happens at your job, you get fired, right? We got to start firing people, man. Hold people accountable. And furthermore, take over. Stop feeling bad. I don't know how to run a school board. You know what? We know somebody that do. Put them up. We're voting. You have no choice. That's your expertise. You're good at it. We're writing your name in on the ballot. However the system go, I think we have to become more diligent. We have to take our political and economic plight very serious, because those are the two things that are keeping us marginalized. But on the flip side, we can take control and ownership of those very things, right? Especially now, because a lot of the core urban cores, we have the majority of. So we're in a lot of positions strategically, politically, and economically already and don't know it. Other people know it. That's why it's such again, reconstruction. So now you see the issues of trying to redistrict. That's gone quiet. I don't know if people remember, that was a big thing. Now all of a sudden, election year, now the issues of redistricting and voting laws are gone very quiet, but they're still working on it. Right. So we need think tanks. We need people to start to keep an eye on these issues that are in the Supreme Court right now that are affecting, 14th and 15th Amendment rights. We need think tanks to keep eyes on these type of issues. We can't fall asleep at no facet of society, right? If we feel like it's war, you feel like a war being on you, you have to prepare as if it's times of war, meaning we need tactical approaches. You have to be strategic. So, and the wars are not, and especially this days and age, are not physical anymore. Right, a lot of them are online, and a lot of them are wars you can't see, and that's the most dangerous war, where you're not aware of it. Right, because now you can go along with it, like they said. What the saying about a conspiracy? You could be a part of a conspiracy and not know it. Right, and people will downplay it; they'll deny it to us. But wake up, we see the reality. Right, if I keep seeing the reality, I'm not gonna keep going back trying something that never worked. Right, so we need something that'll crack this paradigm, right? And that starts really with the most unexpected thing that anyone would expect of our people, and that's loving ourselves first and creating that program of self-determination and say, look, it's enough land in this country where we can say, hey, brother, and it is cheap enough too. We can get on all these platforms and raise money. I mean, again, 1.8 trillion. Think about what we can do with that. That's top 10 nation in spending. Right here in one landmass. Just take 10% of that and what you can do with it. Right? So I think we just have to be more, strategic, more creative in our approaches to attacking these issues. You're talking about reform. They said criminal justice reform, and yet he had nothing but police officers standing up there behind you. So how much reform, like how serious can they be about that reform? Right? When it's the same people you're asking a wolf to not be a wolf. I'm not going to ask you not to be a wolf no more. I'm going to be the shepherd I am and create barriers to keep you out of my community in the first place. Right? And again, organize local residency laws. You don't live around here. You don't need to be benefiting off my tax dollars. Period. And if you don't support that as a politician, you're out of here too. Simple. Our votes are money. Your money equates to votes. So, I mean, we have to understand that dynamic, that equation, right? And this will make our movements and make a lot of more of our advocacies that we're pushing for a lot stronger, because now you're essentially getting to the core of issues. We're talking politics and money and economics, and we have that, and we have, the most important vote in this country, and the most spending power in this country. But if it's not moved together strategically, it's just scattered, and that's no good, right? It's like having a hand as opposed to the fist. You know, it's not as powerful, right? So we need to start realizing, like, okay, who's what. I can't be, everybody can't be the end all be all. We got to leverage the expertise and the passion of each one of us as a people. And going back to the top of that question again, the woman's role, I mean, it's an equation. If you're not fully restored and secure in your womanhood, from us standing up as men, will always be fragmented, and you'll raise men in fear. You'll raise boys in fear, right? And then we'll train our girls not to respect that fear in him that was created from the start. Telling them to be a man. How you gonna be a man? You don't know how. You told him to go get a job for all these years. He has to rely on someone else that doesn't want him in here in the first place to have a job. And when he come back discouraged, he can't find a job. He's criticized, ostracized, talked down on. Again, we talk about that. The mind can only take so much. I'm getting rejected over here. I'm getting rejected here. I'm rejected in my own household. That's where your biggest conflict will then start to grow. And now you got divided households. You know, domestic violence starts to emerge. Substance abuse starts to emerge. Absenteeism starts to emerge, right? Because these free national standards and principles are not there for us to stand on as men and women to hold ourselves accountable to say, well, as a man, here's my role and function in our community. Because the role of a man today is different than it was 200 years ago, right? Simply because now women have been a more integral part of the economy now, right? So you don't, the stay-at-home moms are kind of gone, you know, even though the economy is forcing that dynamic back, but it's still impossible to kind of, you know, glean off of and deal with if the households are divided. So just being that love and that support. If you're a queen, anoint your son as a prince, and you raise him such to be fearless, to be a true warrior and a true king. And you train your daughters to honor that too, and themselves be fearless in the same way. Because some of the greatest rulers of African kingdoms and empires were women.
No, true. Thanks. Thanks for that, Terrence. Very much so, for talking about just how all of it works together. Curtis, Brandon, do you want to speak to that? The role that Black women play in creating healing, helping to create healing spaces for Black men, but also their influence that they have on the esteem of young Black sons that they're raising.
Go ahead, Curtis.
Okay. Well, I would say that one thing that can be learned from that is that the role in which women play is that it teaches a young man at a certain age to be vulnerable, to be emotional. You know, a woman can truly show a young man, how to deal with women, you know, the correct way, like a man can as well. And it takes two. It takes a male to show a man how to be a man, and it takes a woman to show a man how to be more compassionate, you know, ideally how to treat and respect women. So I think just having that influence at a young age really shows a young man how to go about doing certain things and operating in a way that is both conducive to the plight of, you know, of the Black family, you know, and just looking at in terms of helping them cope and deal with stress. I think having that relationship, I think both sides need to understand that it's a relationship that we're stuck in this together. You know, even though personal relationships between the parents may, you know, not be as good as they should be, but I think in order for the child to truly understand and see both sides of the spectrum, he needs to see a certain type of relationship displayed between the mother and father, whether it be cordial, but not in a way to where it's just so much hatred and anger going back and forth. And obviously, I'm speaking from a way in which I'm not aware of, but just some of the things that I've observed or seen or heard or researched growing up, you know, that I think is very important. So, you know, moving forward, a woman can definitely show a young man how to be more affectionate, be in tune with his vulnerable side, you know, and sit back and observe and work on his personal relationships with women. So I think it takes both. Like, again, parents, whether it be the father or the mother, have to understand, like, yo, this is a relationship that we're stuck and we're included in, not only for 18 years, but for the rest of our lives. So we have to make sure that we provide things and do what we can for both sides to, to make it easy as possible for us both. So and until it takes that understanding from both, I think it's going to be a challenge, definitely, in affecting the black family.
Absolutely. One thing, Kai, you trying to get us set up, asking us these questions, talking about we only got a couple minutes left, knowing that this is a whole 2-hour question you done asked us. So we'll have to definitely get together and have this conversation again. When it comes to black women and black men and that dynamic in a community, it's been rocky from the start. One thing we have to be completely honest about, and yes, we may have been from kings and queens back on the continent, but when we got here, we are not those same folks. We might have some of that same energy that was brought with us, but we are GMO people. All right, we were cultivated to be Negroes. And unfortunately, that toxic culture has carried on. I'm not saying we should be, but what I am saying is that dynamic that was set forth for us to be pitted against one another, whether that's by gender or male on male or female by female, that toxicity is still with us. And we have to work on that. And we've had beautiful couples that have stood up and made progress, and parents that have stood up, made progress, grandparents, things of that nature. But there was a twist in our culture. There was something that happened that made it acceptable for us to have this combative nature amongst male and female. We have to work on that. Okay, again, because I get on my own soapboxes. If we're not going to be honest about this stuff and we're going to romanticize the past, we're not going to be able to move forward. Dr. Amos Wilson was talked about earlier. He talks directly about this. If we're going to romanticize history and talk about how we were great and all that, but we don't see it today, it means nothing to the youth that we're talking to. It means absolutely nothing, because they don't see those kingdoms today. They see dysfunction. So we have to be able to role model what a constructive male and female relationship is. Children to develop in a healthy environment need healthy adults, whether a man is present or not. It is more beneficial from my standpoint that a man is present. I'm fortunate enough that I had a lot of strong women that pushed me forward, and then later on in life, I've had strong men that helped me guide and mold who I'm supposed to be as a man. Men can teach compassion. Matter of fact, it's unfortunate that God has not blessed me to have a son yet, but I'm not done having kids, so I hope that I do. But if I do have a son, I don't want my wife teaching him how to be compassionate, because she's going to teach him how to be compassionate like a woman and not how a man is supposed to be compassionate. We have enough boys who've been taught how to have compassion and love and discipline and stuff from women, and that's not effective. That's not working. We have over 40 years of this already, right? That's not what it is. What we need to do is have men who have those same type of attributes from a masculine energy, able to cultivate those young boys so they know how to be men and they can role model how to be constructive men, and that carries on. We lost that. It wasn't just welfare, right? Men were leaving the community before then. If you go back and you look at that era of the 40s, actually you can go back a little earlier than that, 40s and 50s, a lot of men were leaving because the economics shifted. We had a feudalistic system that shifted into industrial system. And once the industry kicked off, a lot of black folks left the South. They headed west for the railroads. They headed up north for the steel and the wood and everything else. And they left their families behind because they couldn't take them families with them to travel. It wasn't the most economical thing to do. So what would they do? They would go to Cincinnati. They would go to Milwaukee. They would go to Danville, Illinois. They would go to Ohio. They would go to all these places, New York, and they would send money back home for their families. But those men did what men do all over the world. They created other families in those places. And that's why you get the Johnson family from here and the Johnson family from there. And y'all all cousins. And then you find out the family secrets as you get older. We have to be honest that we are just human at the end of the day. Now, we got a lot of toxic stuff that's in our humanity that we have to be honest about. But it wasn't just a systematic thing. It was just a natural thing. Men do conquests all over the world. There's black men today who go to the Dominican Republic impregnating all type of women and coming back here. This is a natural thing. Let's keep it real. If we're going to have the conversation, what we need to do is we need to be healthy men and women. We need to be able to have these conversations. We need to also have women be accountable to each other, because it ain't all good in the hood when it comes to our women. All right. And it's hard. I'm probably the only man that's going to say this on this panel, because I don't care if I get the flack. But even when you asked the question, we all took a deep sigh, like, dang, how are we gonna approach this? Because we know the power that women have in our community, and that's real. And guess what? That matriarchal power, ain't nothing wrong with that. But we have to be able to say, sisters, y'all still got some work to do too, and y'all got to hold each other accountable. Because as a black man, if I say anything, I got the black feminists coming after me. I got other black men attacking me. How can you talk about our queens like that? Well, hell, some of our queens is the reason why some of these black boys is in the position they in today, and that's a reality. So if we are not going to have this conversation that we don't have just toxic masculinity, we have toxic femininity as well, we are not going to move forward because we're going to continue to fight back and forth with each other, and things are going to continue to be the same. We have to have healthy adults in children's lives. We have to be cultivating a culture that they have something better than what they already got. One of the like earlier we talked about other cultural groups who come here, and over 4 years they have an economic base that's much stronger than black folks that have been here for 40 years. Well, the reason for that is their disposition for coming to this country is very different. Their cultural values is very different, right? We have to look at culture. We have to change our culture. One of the biggest ways we change culture is environment, our settings. Revolution starts at home. All right. We have to be able to build that at home. We have to be intentional with having babies. You can have sex and not have a child, right? Sex is for what? Pleasure and production. You can divide those two things up. But culturally, if we're using sex as a stress management tool for our trauma, we ain't thinking about putting a condom on. We ain't thinking about getting on birth control. We ain't thinking about none of that. We think about, let me feel good in this moment because I have been traumatized. I'm sick of stress. And I just want to get my, freak on, and boom, now baby's here when I'm not ready. You can be intentional with having children. All right. So if we're not going to look at this from a cultural angle and we're just going to look at it and romanticize it, we're not going to get too far. We have to understand that black women got work to do. All right. Black men got work to do, and we have collective work to do because our babies depend on it. They just going to do what they see. And if all they see is destruction, toxic stress, trauma, and things that don't lead into anything, they will repeat the cycle. At some point, as individuals, we have to make that determination that we are going to break that cycle. My daughters don't know about domestic violence. They've never seen me strike their mom. I knew about that way before the ages that they're at today. And I pray to God that they never will know about any of that, and that they're in healthy relationships, and they know how to relate to a man who is affirmed in his blackness, knows how to treat black women, and cares about them, and shows them compassion, shows them care from a man's perspective. Because if they don't learn it from a man, if they decide to be with a man, they will never understand what that looks like. So I'm going to get off my soapbox because I can go on and end it there. Thank you.
No, thank you, Brandon. Anybody want to add on to the fire that Brandon just laid down?
Just a side note, you all are our healers, right? You all are our healers. But like he touched on, man, until our relationships are back, so we can develop ourselves and cultivate and culture our relationships with those purpose and intents of like he said, we have to be, it's intentional. Like, we have to start to put cultural elements to our relationships and to our social interactions. Because that signifies a lot, and that means a lot, and whether male or female, because it's a balance. And if one is out of balance, the other is out of balance, right? And so, like I said, you all are our healers, and in the same way as we're supposed to be protectors and stand up and create a secure environment for our families, right? And that takes a lot. That takes us to get up first, right? But when that happens, because of this period of independency that our women have been subjected to, again, that abnormal behavior that they've been accustomed to, that it's a combative and it's a fight, right? When they're in the presence of a man that's trying to provide, because it seems like it's something to it, right? So I think, once we got to get to that point, but that's because of the insecurity, right? One day we might come home, we got a job, and then in that same day we can come home and not have that job, right? And so just those insecurities, that balance, I think, again, we keep in mind that you guys are healers, and that we have a job to do in protecting and designing and keeping the children and our women secure and protected in ourselves, you know, and we secure ourselves based on our collective interests. And we have to organize ourselves as political members of communities, and we have to do this thing strategically and collectively together. And you honed in at the most basic level. And that's just the basic functioning relationship between male and female, the African male and the African female. That whole dynamic has to be addressed, because remember, the function of our relationships became distorted during slavery because it was for economic means for others. So now when we're putting together these families nowadays, that economic disconnection, for so long you just used to produce, and she was left to fend and take care of the kids. Men was just shipped across different plantation, right? Oftentimes you have kids and then they might just up and sell you to another plantation so you can keep breeding, right? And we see these patterns return generation after generation in terms of jobs, like you said, and then other families are are created, right? And a lot of drama come with that. But then, you know, that function, that family structure is still fragmented, right? And we have to begin to really holistically restore our. He gave an excellent analogy. The Negro has been genetically modified, right? So we've been removed from who we were. And that's why I said the biggest challenge and the biggest question is, well, who were we before our interaction with the European? Right? Just because they encountered us don't mean that's when our existence began. No. And we know that. We know the richest man that ever lived, no matter what, was Mansa Musa. He was right off the African continent. But remember, he inherited his empire from his brother, and who came into the Americas. But we'll leave it at that note. And I really enjoyed being a part of this discussion tonight with Brandon, Curtis, Kai. The topic was really profound, and I hope people that watched, you know, got something out of it. And, you know, if nothing else, take away from that we have to learn to love ourselves first and foremost, and a love that's not mushy, but, you know, that has a spirit of discernment and a spirit of determination to do better and want better for ourselves, which we have. But I think now we have to redirect it. We have to kind of be like our ancestors and galvanize and create ways to reroute, you know, the emotions of our people, the water, so to speak, to get the fuel, you know, trying to make our emotions go from south to north like we did with the waters, you know, because to reverse course on things is a huge show of force to nature, especially to a people that's trying to reverse our nature and create us into chattel and subhuman and treat us inhumane, right? So we got to rehumanize ourselves. And with that note, I say peace, peace and love.
Thank you, Terrence. So what I want to do so we can start to wrap up our conversation, because I know we could go on. There's so much to unlock and talk about. So hopefully we can do this again, because I mean, looking at the chats, people are definitely appreciative of the conversation that we're having. People are asking questions about, will this happen again? So this is definitely a conversation that our community needs. And so I'm so grateful for the three of you agreeing to come on the platform and to have these type of talks. So in closing, I'll just throw this out and whoever can start. I just want to know if you can provide some of the Black men that are listening, maybe 1 or 2 steps that they can take like tonight or tomorrow, right? Because sometimes it's easier if you do things incrementally instead of trying to handle everything at once. So what are a few steps that they can take right now to begin to heal themselves? Because before we can start doing any work in our community, right, we have to first work on ourselves and get ourselves in a relatively healthy place. So I just throw this out to anyone who wants to start. What are maybe 1 or 2 steps that you recommend for our Black men that they can start doing now to begin their healing process?
I like to start that off. I think the first thing is to do like a self-assessment of who you are. Like look at, you know, your upbringing, you know, understand like your flaws and do like a complete assessment of who you are as a person and who you are today and where you would like to see yourself be. You know, I think relationships are very important, you know, as the brothers were talking about, like, you know, without Martin there would be, without Coretta, there would be no Martin. You know, without Malcolm, there would be no Betty. So, you know, through uh, every movement, you know, women have definitely supported men. Like the Black woman has definitely supported Black men. But to this point, I think it is definitely important to do like an assessment to see what needs to be fixed within self, because in order for you to really optimize at your true potential, your true level, like you have to view your faults and your weaknesses. And once you understand what those are, seek help. You know, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to understand, like as Brandon said, like we're all human, and you know, and so we have things that are good and also that are bad about us as well. And so again, like once you figure out those things that are preventing you from developing these relationships that where you see yourself going, like seek help. Like I think that's very important. It's okay as a Black man, you know, we're taught to be strong. Again, as Music Soul Child said, never complain, just do what you need to do, go about your business. So in order for you to really, you know, be who you are, and I know I keep repeating myself, but just understand, like I need help. It's okay to reach out. Like those are my main two steps. So thank you first and foremost. I appreciate it, Ka. It was definitely a pleasure speaking on this platform. So look forward to doing this again.
I'll dive in next. You know, my kind of tips to Black men would be, first, acknowledge the pain. It's okay that you've been hurt. That doesn't make you less of a man. It just shows that you've had a human experience that is painful, and that doesn't mean you have to cry or that. But sometimes pain makes us angry, right? So just acknowledging the things that have actually happened. The second thing would be value yourself and your experiences, because nobody else is going to do it. If you don't value who you are, where you came from, and where you at right now, and where you plan to go, who else is going to do it? You know, you got to be your own biggest cheerleader. To move forward. And then the last thing will be channeling your intake and your expression. And what I mean by that is paying attention to what you're taking in. There's a lot of different media, there's a lot of different narratives on who Black men are. But what are you taking in? Where are you getting your knowledge from? Where are you getting your entertainment from? Where are you getting your support from? All those things are important. And then how are you expressing those things, right? So how are you letting those things out, being very mindful of that? I think that those are a way to start that healing journey for anybody. And again, thank you, Kai, for having me on. If folks want to reach out to me, you can go to jegna.org or on social media platforms on by Brandon Jones, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
Thank you, gentlemen. I think I'll just kind of just, you know, follow up to these gentlemen, what they said, especially Brandon, I mean, and Chris too. I mean, the points they just made, you know, I think importantly first, just understand, man, like the pressure of this society, like when you hear our experiences, these experiences are shared. So that means it's not you, right? So, you know, we can't own this victim stuff, man. Like it's just like, you know what? It's a byproduct of an abnormal system. And I got an abnormal way of thinking that I need to straighten out, right? But the idea of therapy and counseling in our community is so taboo. You know what I'm saying? We see it as, oh, you're crazy. No, you go there to keep from going crazy. You know what I'm saying? That's the point, to keep you from going crazy and snapping, because and to help you release that stress. You know what I mean? So I think, you know, one or two things, man, definitely, you know, own up to it. Like, you know what? We're under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress in the society, and it gets to you. You know what I'm saying? And without an outlet, man, you'll crack, you'll blow. You only can load so much electricity into one socket before you got a problem, right? So I think with the human brain is even so much so, because it's fragile because of emotion, right? Or it could take one event to trigger someone and they'll lose everything, right? Just in the blinking of an eye and just black out, right? And then when they come to, they behind bars and their life is forever altered, right? So I think we're understanding that and having a love and appreciation of yourself, man. And we got to learn to love and appreciate each other, man, and value ourselves. Because if we want to run around here and talk about Black Lives Matter and this lives matter, it only matters if it matters to you in between us. I can't be walking downtown and protesting, talking about Black Lives Matter, and then in the next breath talking about forget this dude, or I'm gonna kill you, or I can't stand you, I hate you. It has to be no room for hatred, but unfortunately it's a reality. But you know, grab you a spiritual foundation, to build upon and to solidify yourself in who you are. And, you know, that takes a measure of love, and it takes a level of humility. But again, if you want to change, you want to do it different, you got to do something differently, man. We can't expect the same results. I mean, different results doing the same thing. And we need healthier outlets, you know, get into meditating. One thing I get from my cousin here is walking a lot, right? Walking is a very good stress reliever. Just finding healthier outlets, you know, to deal with issues and stuff, because it's difficult. You know, again, just leaving out our front door and trying to return home safely in itself is stressful enough. And that just walking around always under constant anxiety is traumatic, and it's stressful, and it's a fear tactic. That's terroristic, right? That's terrorism. And even though people might say, oh, it's wrong, but at the end of the day, people are getting off on that fear tactic, seeing you in fear, hearing that you're scared to walk down the street, right? That's a bully. You're being bullied, right? So we got to stop being chumps. But that started with loving ourselves and appreciating each other, man, because I can't say my life matter and then I'm running around treating a brother that look like me. Return again. We return these Afrocentric principles, man, of being one, of the oneness and the unity and everything. So I see God in you. I see life in you. You know what I'm saying? I see me in you. You know what I mean? I see love in you. I see value in you. Most importantly, I see the humanity in you. You know what I mean? So I'm just concurring and just elaborating on what they said. But and it's the guy, depending on where you are in your process, but start with just wanting to do better, wanting better, and love yourself, man. Love, love, love is discipline. And that entire, you love yourself, I mean, you got to line yourself to be more productive and to get more out of yourself. And that'll emanate in your environment. And with that, I'll say peace.
Thank you. So if you gentlemen would hold on 1 second before you log off, because I want to chat with you after we end the broadcast. So I wanted to say thank you for everyone who joined tonight, who joined in the chat. I want to, of course, thank you, Terrence, Curtis, Brandon. Thank you so much for joining this platform and having this conversation. And I look forward to having more. So if you guys have any topics, because I will be doing this again. So if anyone in the chat, if you do have topics that you would like covered in the next live session, please drop in the comment section, or you can send me an email, kaimarie.jth@gmail.com, and just let me know topics that you would like to cover in the next live session. Again, thank you guys so much for joining. And one more thing. If there's any resources that the panelists have that you have for Black men, I have started a Facebook group for Black men that's all about empowering, uplifting, building, growing. So if you have any resources that I can put in that group and also in the description of this event, I can put that in there because a couple people have been asking for resources for therapists, resources for like how to even create a healing space for Black men. So if you have any of that information, if you can, we'll chat after this is over, but just let me know. And with that being said, I hope you all have a beautiful night. Thanks so much for your time and take care.
Good night, everyone.